I thought that this quote, this excerpt from the work, was important enough just to put it by itself, just so to let it sink in what this excerpt is really about. And then we can maybe have one more video where we suggest some of Darwin's details. He says, the high standard of our intellectual powers, and ours, meaning the human species, the high standard of our intellectual powers and moral disposition is the greatest difficulty which presents itself after we have been driven to this conclusion on the origin of man. The conclusion is that we evolved from other species, like everything else, that we emerged out of nature. And why are these two things problems? Well, the usual way that human beings have distinguished themselves from the rest of nature, saying we are unique, we are different, we couldn't be related or seen as animals, is that we have reason or intellect and we have will, free choice. That what distinguishes human beings most strongly from any other living creature is the fact that we can reason, we can think, and that we have free choice, which is bound up with our ideas of ourselves as moral creatures. We have a sense of right and wrong. The problem is, how could we have gotten those things? Right? Now, in creation stories, again, the biblical one, human beings are made in God's image. And traditional interpretation of that is that we don't necessarily look like God. That's not the way to read it, as Galileo would say. The way to interpret that is that we are like God insofar as we have intellect and will, that he gave those things to us. Darwin, who's dispensed with any kind of mythological or religious notions of the origins of human beings, has to account for how reason and will, that is, the ability to think and the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, how could these have actually evolved naturally over the course of our development into the human species? That is the big problem. And this excerpt is really about that. It's really about giving a kind of an explanation of how human beings could have gotten so smart to the point where they can think and reason, which Darwin dispenses with pretty quickly, as we'll see. He thinks there's a pretty easy explanation of that. But what's more difficult is, how could we have developed a moral nature, a moral sense, which we take to be so characteristic of human beings to the exclusion of all other beings. Our notions of right and wrong, our notions that we should live in a certain way, even if we don't. I mean, that is harder to account for in purely naturalistic terms, which is what he's got to do.